Nirvana speaks the oracle, and I am saved. Thank you, listener, for memory.
Okay, so I had talked earlier about Allen Ginsberg telling me before he died that he his sort of goal was to, as a poet, is to try to map consciousness, implying with language that the map, if you look closely at the nature of the map itself, it would be comprised of languaging, of language stuff in some way, either mentalese or maybe even the thought forms behind it, but at least more coming halfway toward the verbal domain. And then I thought of that later when I was talking about if in fact we can become, and not so much metaphorically, but I'm thinking more and more as time goes on literally, that as individuals, at least some of us as bellwethers or forerunners for the rest of us, can be way showers by modeling what happens when you give yourself over to or intentionally allow for or autogenically self-change or mutate or allow to have happen to you, that you can become quantum coherent in the midst of a quantum decoherent world. And becoming quantum coherent in the midst of a quantum decoherent world at this level of reality then puts you in quantum resonance with the underlying ground of being that upholds and from which come all things and back to which all go all things in the quantum decoherent state. So underlying all this quantum decoherence we see around us in this macro level is an undifferentiated quantum coherent state from which it all arises. I'm not quite sure of why things stay differentiated, why they stay obdurately, objectively real to our attending consciousness at that stage of our species evolution and our individual development, except that I think it goes with the territory and is part of our unfolding learning process as a species. And so we have to keep the story self-similar enough day by day that we don't lose the thread of the lesson learning. And so that's why it doesn't break the bubble and it doesn't all just evaporate and become just anarchic. That you never know what's going to be on your plate the next day you get up, or what next page in the book when you turn the page. So that's my rationale for why we don't just swim around in the undifferentiated state, or why we can't be so creative that we keep shape changing and changing our consensus reality and parts of it. It's crazy enough, even in the very nailed down, overly constrained, programmed and conditioned and propagandized and stultified and lobotomized nature of our consensus reality, to even hear it's too much for most people. And getting more so, which is telltale of the change that's afoot, that's imminent. This far from equilibrium, nonlinear, more and more synchronistic senses and anomalistic senses of interconnectedness, of what quantum physics would call non-local correlatedness, interpenetration, of phase entangledness, of higher dimensional miracle-like intrusions on our lower dimensionality, our flatland, and so on. So that's more than most fellow human beings in this country or this world can take, because they're not prepared for it. I'm prepared for it. I spent my whole life preparing for it and talking about it, and usually, as the saying goes, before my time. Not that I feel proud of that. It makes it very frustrating for me this whole lifetime. But things are coming to focus more now. So I think there's going to be a lot of people opening to be ready for some of these things we're talking about that we're not ready for earlier, because they could cool their heels and go through the rest of the incarnation. They could put it off forever, at least this lifetime, without ever taking it seriously. They could keep their jobs, they could keep their sanity, they could keep their health. I don't think that's going to be so easy to extrapolate ahead to in the next few years, the rest of my lifetime here, at least. So the point of how do you map consciousness if it's undifferentiated, if it's consciousness without an object in that state, how does someone from within the locus of quantum coherence, which is by definition not a quantum decoherent state by reason of having the wave function representing it collapsed. Kind of awkward, but I'm using that vocabulary. I'm not overly attached to quantum physics. It's an extended poem or a metaphor for me, but it's useful right now. And I can talk to a lot of people who are running the show in science these days to try to get to them to spiritualize them more, making bridges like this. And it's useful. Anyway, so how do you do that? If I'm talking about not just a myth, but actually a possibility that we could move to or taste of or drink from the waters of a quantum coherent state more and more as a species, or some of us as individuals growing into that state. What would it look like when the person opens their mouth? When they pick up the talking stick and intend to communicate something? Isn't that not ultimately Wittgenstein's problem of private language problem in spades? That you have that whatever language is going to come out of you, whatever symbolic system is going to embody and express forth that to a fellow human being, that's a fellow incarnate human being at approximately this level of consciousness that we're all approximately sharing to share this consensus reality. What language, if any, that could emanate from you, from such a quantum coherent state, would be not inarticulate, because it wouldn't even be articulate. There would be nothing to articulate. It would be undifferentiated. How do you talk about an undifferentiated state when you are choosing to remain undifferentiated with respect to it, which allows you to be at one with it, immersed with it, or thoroughly knowing it, like my friend the philosopher Hegel said, that all is really spirit or absolute spirit, and underlyingly it's all that, but it has to historically or individually developmentally evolve to the point that it realizes that it's absolute spirit, and until it does, it's all fucked up and dislocated and separated apart, and each man is an island and dissociated and decoherent and all that stuff, and that's, I would take liberties and call it an antithesis state or an antithetical state, and then you're trying to reconnect the thesis state that recovers that thesis state of the original absolute spirit. But what I liked about Hegel was at one point he's trying to describe what would the universe be like if it was all, what's really coming home free, what Desjardins might call the omega point, if any kind of evolutionarily arrived home, the Christ consciousness, the omega point, as he called it. Hegel would call it reaching the point where all that is, which for him was absolute spirit, he was a philosophical idealist as I am, where all was absolute spirit, aware throughout itself at any focus, foci, locus, station within that could be takeable or be given or bestowed, or from any frame of reference within absolute spirit. From that frame of reference would experientially know that it was absolute spirit, surrounded by and experiencing fellow absolute spirit. Now that's maybe a little bit kind of tautological or uninteresting for some people, because first of all, what would you do? What kind of games would you make up on the playground? What problems would there be to solve? What kind of relationships could there be? There could be any relationships. None to fall in love with, nobody to fall out of love with, no way to get lost to be found. You're always home free, immersed in omniscience, omnipotence, and probably omnibenevolence as well, hopefully. And so that's where we're all going. I mean, I believe that's where we're all going, but it's all underlyingly right there at this moment, in the twinkling of an eye, through the veil lightly. It's right there, right now. But somehow this Maya is the tonnage of this Maya and the obdurate self-same inertial, stubborn, deadening quality of it is here and remains here, and we wake up to it each morning. That, for me, as a philosophical idealist and as somebody in touch with a higher dimensionality, for better, for worse, and a lot in my life has been for the worse, not very profitable, not very understandable by anybody else, not very positively reinforced, and getting me in trouble. Nonetheless, it's been there since I was a kid. So there I am, and I do know that all is absolute spirit, and that right now we are experiencing that absolute spirit through dissociating lenses, that we see the many of spirit, and not the unity of the spirit and we are usually not even aware that we are spirit. That we are spirit, acknowledging and experiencing and interacting with fellow spirit. That all is self-same substance. And that great leveler, this is the opposite of physical reductionism. This is idealist reductionism. If consciousness says, if physical reductionism, current materialism says that consciousness is an emergent epiphenomenon of viable, protoplasmic, bioelectric, neurological firing material activity, and that when there isn't that substrate to have it emerge out of qualitatively, experientially, short-term, transiently, the genie goes back in the box, and there is no genie separate from the box, and it's just experiential, and that's it. and when you're dead, and all that sort of stuff. That's physical reductionism's view of consciousness and all the quality, all the tastes and the lived experience, all the things I'm trying to make language as a poet about the introspected, phenomenological self-tasting and groping of consciousness of itself and of its own hinterlands and of its own objects and its contents. That's the love affair. That's the incestual intercourse. That's the polymorphous perverse of it all. Anyway.
The flood will come, but you must not forget the oracle. You can say